Hey everybody, it's GauntletX, and welcome to the Shadows over Innistrad Remastered Arena Open Day 1 event. This is the highest stakes entry-level event on Arena where anybody can get in by spending 5,000 gems or 25,000 gold. If you make it with a 7-win run through Day 1, you will qualify for the one-and-done Day 2 event, where if you lose there, you cannot re-enter with any amount of gems or gold, so you have to get a really good run during Day 2, but if you do, you are eligible to win cash prizes up to a couple $1,000s. So a very competitive event here today with a lot of potential cash money on the line. For that reason, it is super expensive to try to make it through Day 1. Again, 5,000 gems or 25,000 gold, and you only get your entry fee back if you get a 7-win run. Otherwise, you're going to be spewing gems even at 6 wins there. So we're going to be doing the best we can in the Shadows over Innistrad Remastered sealed format. Without further ado, let's bust open these packs and see what we get to build with today. Alright, well, it looks like we're probably going to want to try very hard to play a black-white deck here. We have two Planeswalkers in the sealed pool, both of which are in black and white. We have Liliana the Last Hope, which can keep giving things -2/-1, or returning creatures from our graveyard to our hand, which is pretty nice, especially against 1 toughness creatures. And then we have Sorin Grim Nemesis, which in my opinion is even better. Kind of expensive, a 6-mana Planeswalker here, but Sorin comes with 6 loyalty, and for a +1, Sorin's going to draw us a card and have our opponent lose life equal to that card's mana value. -X, we get to deal X to any creature Planeswalker and gain X life, so Sorin can be a removal spell as well. And of course, both of these Planeswalkers have pretty absurd ultimates if we get to a really high amount of loyalty on them, so very, very powerful cards there. We also have Descend Upon the Sinful. This is a 6-mana sorcery to exile all creatures, so already a board wipe right there. A little bit overcosted, however, if you have Delirium, then it is just right. It's pretty solid. You get to create a 4/4 White Angel if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So with Delirium, this becomes incredibly worth it at 6 mana. So those are the strongest cards in the sealed pool by a whole lot, so we would have to have really, really bad commons and uncommons in white and black to keep us off of those colors, because those are some incredible bombs. In our other colors, we have Prized Amalgam, which is fine if you're doing a lot of graveyard recursion, Sage of Ancient Lore, which is a pretty solid value play in green, and then Sigarda's Aid, which doesn't really work in limited, but those 3 mythic rares in white and black, incredibly exciting. We'll see if we have the support to play those, but it's pretty unlikely that we don't, because even if our white and black commons and uncommons are just average, white and black are going to be phenomenal colors. So usually I do like to take a look at all my multicolored and colorless cards, so I feel like I'm kind of just going through the motions by doing that here, because again, incredibly likely we play white-black, but looking at the colorless cards for things that might fit into any deck, I'm not a very big fan of the Murderer's Axe. Wildfield Scarecrow is a good way to trigger Delirium and help us splash if we want to try to splash in white or splash in black, anything like that. Cryptolith Fragment is a fine mana rock, again, if we need the fixing. Field Creeper's not great, but Terrarian's another fine fixing card that can help fill Delirium by getting an artifact in our grave. Heirloom's pretty filler, and Explosive Apparatus is just another Delirium card. When it comes to our multicolored cards, we just have the Sorin and Prized Amalgam that we already saw. And then for dual lands, we have red-green, green-white, and blue-black available. So we'll keep that in mind as we start building the deck, taking a look at each individual color and seeing what we've got there. So starting off with our white, we do have a Topplegeist, which is a pretty great way to start the game, a really cheap flyer that if we get Delirium, keeps tapping things down, which is excellent. Bunch of solid filler aggressive creatures in the color. Certainly not a bad color at all, and of course white gives us access to Descend Upon the Sinful and Sorin Grim Nemesis as well. We've got a Lingering Souls in the color pair as well, and the card is completely absurd. 3 mana to make 2 1/1s with flying, and then 2 mana to make 2 more of them. Getting 4 1/1s with flying off of just one card is a really, really big deal. We've got a Griff's Boon as well. That can give any of our non-flying creatures flying, and it can keep coming back from our graveyard if they keep killing whatever we put the boon on. Blessed Alliance is a solid defensive spell. Angelic Purge is a solid removal spell we can use on anything late in the game, and a way to put a land in our graveyard late in the game to help fill out that Delirium for Descend Upon the Sinful and Topplegeist. So pretty big fan of the white. A tiny bit low on removal, just the one Angelic Purge really, but we also have a board wipe, and of course the Sorin Grim Nemesis if we go black-white, so pretty great color there. Check out our blue now. Blue looks pretty empty, very low on playables. Laboratory Brutes only playable if you have a ton of cards that get value off of Self-Mill, which doesn't look like we do here. Stormrider Spirit's a bit slow, Geist of the Archives is a bit slow, so I'm not a huge fan of the creature base. I do like Ingenious Scab a lot. But then looking at the spells, we have 2 Deny Existence, which is a pretty narrow counter spell, only being able to counter creatures and doing it for 3 mana. Just a bit inefficient. Forbidden Alchemy is pretty good in those self-mill decks, but yeah, it seems like we just don't have a high quantity of solid blue playables. When we're talking about like actually good blue playables, it's like this much. Essence Flux are okay to counter removal spells or get a free block, but they're a lot better when you have a lot of spirits. And we have a maximum of 1 in blue. Do have a few in white, but still. Blue does not seem like where it's at in the sealed pool. Taking a look at our black now, we've got 2 Geese's Bidding, which is really good if we can madness this card out, but even if we can't, 4 mana to get 2 2/2s is going to help give us the time and the blockers to make it to some late game plays and protect our planeswalkers like Liliana. We've got a Sever the Bloodline, which is a phenomenal removal spell. 4 mana to exile a creature and all copies of that creature. And you can flash it back for 7, so it's 2 removal spells in 1, and it works against an entire board of tokens if your opponent has spit out a ton of 1/1 vampires with lifelink or a ton of zombie tokens or anything like that, so really nice to have Sever the Bloodline. Grotesque Mutation, Call the Bloodline, Deadweight, those are all solid, not incredible. And then we're pretty low on creatures here, but the non-creature spells are pretty fantastic. Don't think Macabre Waltz looks great in here, but Sever the Bloodline, Geese's Bidding, Liliana the Last Hope, maybe not Merciless Resolve either. Yeah, probably not enough madness for Call the Bloodline as well, but it definitely looks like we have enough support in black-white for the black-white Liliana plus Sorin deck to be the best place to be here. Definitely need white to fill out the creature curve a lot better. So white is likely to be the primary color with black as the secondary. I like to have a little bit of fixing for that though, because Liliana is double black, Geese's Biddings are double black. So those could be a little hard to hit if we have a low amount of swamps in the deck. But black is definitely serviceable to get the Liliana and the Sorin in there. Looking at red, we've got a Fiery Temper, which is great. Couple Make Mischiefs are nice. Galvanic Bombardment. So a bunch of great removal spells there. And some annoying little blocking devil tokens. But then for the creature base, just a Bloodseeker, Conduit of Storms, Pyrehound, and Howlpack Wolf. Pretty average creature base, but pretty solid spells in the red. And last and probably not least is green. We've got Deathcap Cultivator, which is a green-black mana fixer. We've got Vessel of Nascency that can dig for an artifact, creature, or land. Or Planeswalker from our top 4, put it into our hand, put the rest in the grave. We could try to go like green, black, white, which would be interesting, but Swift Spinners are super filler in a bad way. I don't think we have enough clue tokens for Bloodbriar. Crawling Sensation's quite slow, but we could try to go Crawling Sensation Spider Spawning build here. Need a really high creature count for that. Don't think we'd be running the aim high combat tricks. Yeah, Abzan, green, black, white could be okay. Would give us access to the Sage of Ancient Lore and the Spider Spawning, which are powerful cards. Give us more ways to help with Delirium with Vessel. I feel like white still has probably some of our best creatures, so we would be trying to turn black into a splash, but our best black cards all require 2 black mana, so it's kind of hard to splash double black cards like Liliana. Unless we're really okay with running them late in the game. if our black-white deck looks pretty weak, then we can definitely consider the green, but I don't think we need to start off immediately going after the green-black-white deck. Alright, so here's a look at every black and white card in the deck. If we put them all together, definitely going to have to cut out a lot of cards here. We get to cut 15 cards, so let's start cutting all of the most mediocre cards that we've put in right now. I think Gavony Unhallowed is our slowest 4-drop, and we're probably going to cut down to a relatively low creature count in this deck, because we do have a lot of filler dorky creatures in here, like Graph Rats, that we don't have any Midnight Scavengers, so it's a 2-mana 2-1 with no text, which is really bad. I think all of our other 4s, 3s, and 2s are okay, at least. I mean, Dawngryph really isn't doing much for us, because again, we don't really care about being aggressive, so the flying is just for being able to block, so it's kind of like a 3-mana 2-2 reach, which is a pretty horrific rate. 3 mana for a 2-2, always bad, unless the ability is quite good. I don't think the flying makes up for it. We don't have a lot of ways to help trigger the Lone Rider, but got a couple. I've got like Near Heath Chaplain, maybe Apothecary Geist. I guess I only have one other spirit in here, the Topple Geist, but 4 mana 2/3 flyer is also just fine. Having that 3 toughness is pretty massive in the format. There's a lot of 2/2s. I guess I've got a Lingering Souls that gives us spirit tokens to work with Apothecary Geist. Dauntless Cathar will give us a spirit token to work with Apothecary Geist, so it is possible, even if it is unlikely that this gains us 3. Really just don't have any combat tricks to buff the Lone Rider to get it flipped, but I mean, a 2-mana 1/1 first strike lifelink isn't completely horrible. We could run a couple Strength of Arms or something to get it to flip. This card is just so good if you can flip it. Yeah, I don't think it's like the worst thing in the universe if we never flip it. I'm probably going to cut Sanitarium Skeleton. I think the card is just way too mana inefficient. 3 mana to return it from your graveyard to your hand, then you have to spend 1 again on your turn to put it back on the board. Really slow blocker. We'll cut those 3, but I'm considering cutting Dawngryph and Lone Rider. Lone Rider usually great, we just don't have a lot of great ways to use it, and this is a deck that doesn't look like it's going to want to play any combat tricks for anything else. So if we put combat tricks in here, they are exclusively to work with Lone Rider and like nothing else. So we'll see here. Looking at the non-creature spells now, we've got Griff Spoon, which is pretty solid. Sigarda's Age just doesn't work in Sealed. We don't have enough auras and equipments. Strength of Arms is probably going to get cut because the only thing it would be in here to work with is the Lone Rider, as I said before. We don't have any equipment in the deck to get any 1/1s off of that. Deadweight is a solid, cheap removal spell that can fill the grave for Delirium. Graph Harvest is super slow, not very into it. I don't think we really want a bunch of cards that are super slow and grindy because we already just have bombs for winning the game. If it goes long to where we draw a lot of cards, that just means more opportunities to see Liliana or Sorin or Descend Upon the Sinful. So I don't really want like mana sink cards that are trying to grind out a long game, because in those games we're just drawing into a mythic rare and trying to win off of that. We really want a lot of better, just early blockers, early removal spells, cards that keep us alive and give us the time to draw into these, rather than cards that take over the game late game. We've already got that covered. So at 2 mana we have Blessed Alliance, great defensive spell. Feeling of Dread, not the best, especially if we're not splashing blue. We're probably not. Call the Bloodline is not phenomenal, but we do have 2 copies of Geese's Bidding, which does have Madness to work with it, and late game we can discard any extra lands to use for it. It's definitely on the chopping block, but there's a couple things we could maybe do with it. I don't love Grotesque Mutation, same reason I don't love Strength of Arms. Definitely not a Macabre Waltz deck. None of our creatures are that good for this card. And there's 0 Madness value from discarding a card with Madness at sorcery speed. The primary value for Madness is being able to play it cheap and being able to play it at instant speed. That's why cards like Olivia's Dragoon are really what you want to work with your Madness spells, because you get to discard that card for free. You don't have to spend any mana on a spell up front to discard anything, and you could do it at instant speed. Macabre Waltz isn't a card I'm very interested in, even when I'm a dedicated black-red Madness deck, because I have to spend 2 mana up front. I have to do all my mana stuff at sorcery speed. It's just not really what Madness is about. So we've got Angelic Purge now. That's solid removal. Lingering Souls is incredible. No way we're cutting that. We're a low enough creature count that Rally the Peasants is not going to be exciting. Merciless Resolve as well. Having to sack a land is really, really bad, and even just sacking creature tokens not great for that. Definitely love Liliana, definitely love Sever the Bloodline, definitely love Geese's Bidding, even if we have 0 ways to discard it just to get a couple 2/2s for 4. Humble the Brute is a little bit narrow. Not everybody is going to be playing a lot of creatures with power 4 or greater, so there's going to be some times where this is dead in our hand, and those times will be horrible, but when we are playing against a big scary creature, it'll be great. So I think I'll put it on the chopping block as well, but not necessarily cutting it. And then Certain Death here, another really slow removal spell. Put that on the chopping block. So we need to cut 11 more cards. This would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we get to keep 3 of these cards that we've set aside. So first and foremost, I'm going to cut the Mana Sink of Graph Harvest. Cut the Rally the Peasants because of our low creature count. Cut the Feeling of Dread without a blue splash. Cut the Macabre Waltz, none of our creatures are that valuable to return. Merciless Resolve I think is just a pretty bad, pretty slow card. Kind of want to go ahead and cut out the Combat Tricks here, which makes me want to cut the Lone Rider as well then. I do want to take another look at all of our life gain to work with Lone Rider. Apothecary Geist can flip it if we have a Spirit on board. Sorin can flip it with the -X. Blessed Alliance can flip it. That looks like about it. Just feels like not a lot of ways to flip the card. If I cut the Combat Tricks, then it doesn't look like this is a deck that really wants Combat Tricks. I guess I could leave Call the Bloodline in alongside it, but that's... I don't know, that again looks real awkward. Yeah, I think I'm just going to cut the whole Lone Rider package. Cut the Mutation, the Strength of Arms, the Bloodline, the Lone Rider. We have Dawngriff back in, Certain Death, and Humble the Brute. We'll have that be the deck for now. With Descend Upon the Sinful, that card is fine without Delirium, but it's really good with Delirium, so we want to see how many of each card type we have. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 creatures. We've got 0 artifacts. 2 instants. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sorceries? Wow. It might be worth cutting one of our more mediocre sorceries for another instant just to help with Delirium. Make Delirium more consistent. We cut Certain Death as the most mediocre sorcery. See if there's a better instant that we're not playing. Or a pretty comparable one. I guess I could splash in blue for Forbidden Alchemy and Feeling of Dread, but doesn't seem like a great spot to be. I don't think our mana fixing was great, but if it was really good, we could maybe splash red. Yeah, we have no duels that help splash red. We have 1 duel that helps splash blue. And then we have 1 Terrarian and 1 Wildfield Scarecrow. I guess we have the Fragment as well. Fragment, Wildfield, Terrarian if I really want to get splashing. It is possible. Splash red for Bombardment. It's actually kind of it. Splash blue would be for Forbidden Alchemy, really. These don't seem like that powerful of cards to splash. Yeah, I think the only other thing that's worth considering is maybe the green-white splash black build. That's just pretty hard to cast Liliana the Last Hope in that, but we cut the double Geese's Bidding, the Dragoon, the Certain Death, and the Deadweight, and just play a green core to the deck. Then we are playing Terrarian, probably playing just Terrarian and Wildfield Scarecrow so that our mana fixers end up in the graveyard for Delirium, rather than the Fragment that sits on the board. Would want to up the creature count from 10 quite a bit for Spider spawning. I think this just straight up black-white deck looks perfectly reasonable already. A lot more consistent mana. We could even just play a Terrarian because it cycles itself, and it can hit double black if we don't do it naturally. Cut Certain Death for that. That'll make Delirium more consistent. Could play the Apparatus instead, but that's really inefficient. 4 mana total to deal 2 damage to one thing, versus Deadweight just being 1 mana to basically deal 2 damage to one thing with that -2/-2 aura. Yeah, I think I'll just play a Terrarian there. Cycle it out, draw a card. I don't really want to splash anything here unless I go like white-green splash the black. Or green-black splash the white. I think this is probably how the deck is supposed to look like if we're just going to be the white-black deck here. Probably the good mana split right there, so we still have enough double black to hit Liliana and Geese's Biddings. Even though we've got a lot more white than black, we don't want to go like 10-7 split here. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to take a peek at the green-focused build. Getting that potential spider spawning value. Cultivator and Ulvenwald Captive are two 2-mana mana dorks. That's pretty great. Byway Courier to investigate when it dies. Still don't think we'll have enough clues for Bloodbriar. Swift Spinner's just not a great rate at 4 mana. Sage Mage Floor, Thornhide Wolves, that's fine. Briarbridge Patrol's fine. Wolfkin Bond, not great. Don't really care about the combat tricks much. Crawling Sensation could be okay, because we're going to be playing some Delirium cards and also Spider Spawning. Confront the Unknown could be okay with Ulvenwald Mysteries. I don't know if we'll have enough clue tokens to make this really pop, though. 1, 2, 3, 4 potential ways to make a clue right now. I mean, unless we've got like great stuff to do that in black or white, it feels unlikely. So green-black... Don't really like all of those. Merciless Resolve can sack a land for Delirium, but still don't love it. Our black creatures are just so bad. Yeah, our good black spells, again, are just all the non-creature spells. The Geese's Bidding, the Liliana, the Severed Bloodline. Yeah, I feel like we're on Splash the Black. For Liliana, Sever the Bloodline, and Sorin. Maybe the Deadweight as well. So white would be the more premier color in the deck here. And did we get any investigating in white? We got one more card that investigates? Okay, I don't think that's enough to really go after the Ulvenwald Mysteries then. I don't think we need Crawling Sensation. I think it's too much of a do-nothing a lot of the time. So I'm going to consider cutting that. Definitely cut all the combat tricks out of the white cards. Keep the Lingering Souls for sure. 17 creatures? We do want a high creature count for spider spawning, but the problem is our non-creatures are so much better than our creatures. Wanted to cut 8 non-creatures here, we'd cut a Crawling Sensation for sure. Why is there an island in my deck? Interesting. Interesting, Magic Arena. Groundskeeper really doesn't do anything unless we're self-milling a lot, and then picking up lands to discard them for something, but that's not something that this deck does. I, again, just don't feel like we have enough synergies for Lone Rider. Yeah, that's the thing. I get to this build, and then I just want to cut all creatures, which makes spider spawning significantly worse. I guess Humble the Brute's the least consistent removal spell that we have. Deadweight off the splash is a bit slow, because we're not going to have it turn 1, turn 2 that often. Probably don't care for the combat trick. You know, this really doesn't look that much stronger than just playing white-black. Plus we still have to make room for Wildfield Scarecrow Terrarian for this build to actually work out. Maybe we're not a Griffspoon deck on the defensive over here. I am looking to cut non-creatures. And that, out of everything else we have in the side, seems like it makes the most sense to cut out of the non-creature cards. Could cut the Geists out of the creatures, because we need to cut 3 more cards still. Maybe cut a Devilthorn Fox. Don't love Dawngriff, one of our weakest creatures. Thornhide Wolves also. Let's go Griffspoon, Dawngriff, Devilthorn, Thornhide, because I have 2 Guardian Pilgrims, Topplegeist, Lingering Souls, Dauntless Cathar token for Geist's life gain. Near Heath Chaplain also making spirits. Well, actually, now that this is complete, it is kind of tempting. That double black on Liliana is kind of difficult, but Wildfield Scarecrow and Terrarian, our 2 mana fixing cards, can both hit double black. We can choose to get 2 black mana off of Terrarian the turn that we sacrifice it, and we can choose to get 2 swamps off the Wildfield Scarecrow. Where did the creature count end up at? 13? It's not horrible in general for a slower sealed deck, but it's not ideal for a spider spawning deck. Still not going to cut the spider spawning, but spawning's not going to be as explosive as we wanted it to be, and that's the main reason to be in green. Outside of Sage of Ancient Lore, which is just solid. Not like incredible. And this is definitely a place we can be. I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot of this so I can look at it right next to my first build. But currently in my head, I'm thinking the first build is a little bit better. Like, it's a tiny bit lower card quality, but not a large enough difference in card quality to really justify or be worth mudding up the mana base a bit, slowing the deck down a bit. I just don't think we have to do that with the sealed pool. Not that our black and white are particularly great in terms of the general card quality. We're obviously just playing the colors primarily for the planeswalkers, the mythic rares in general. However, the fact that our deck is going to be a relatively low creature count, even if we swap to green, black, white, means that we're not really getting that much extra value, because the most tempting thing in green is the spider spawning, and it's going to be a bit weaker than usual here. It's still going to be strong for sure, but that's like the reason to be in green, like Briarbridge Patrol, Byway Courier, Cultivator, Captive, Vessel, these are all just fine. Even Sage is solid, but spawning's just stronger. Yeah. Alright, so I've got the screen cap of that, so I'm going to discard changes, pull open the old deck. One last look at these side by side, but this can guarantee where I'm at here, so let's see. So yeah, here at 2 mana we have 2 Guardians of Pilgrims, a Devilthorn Fox, and a Dragoon versus 2 Guardians, a Cultivator, and a Captive. So green does give us 2 mana dorks there at 2 mana, which can help spit out a Sorin early. Or descend upon the Sinful early, but I think both of those cards are powerful enough we don't need to ramp into them for them to be good. At 3 mana we have Dauntless Cathar, Dawngryff instead of Cathar, Byway Courier, Scarecrow. That is a bit weaker for sure. We've got the Geist and the Chaplain. What are we getting here that we didn't have in the other build? We're getting a Deadweight and a couple Geese's Biddings. Playing the Griff Spoon. Feel like pretty fair trade-offs. We're playing a Humble the Brute in this one. Which could be worse, could be less consistent. But the mana base, again, is more consistent here. I'm very much not a fan of the Dawngryff. I don't think this is a great Griff Spoon deck either. The biddings are fine, but we can't madness them to make them cheaper. The Humble Brute could be bad in certain scenarios. Might actually be on the green, black, white deck. More creatures in general there. We're still playing all the best cards. We just have a little bit of a looser mana base. I guess the number one thing this deck has going for it is it's significantly easier to just cast Liliana on turn 3 than it is in the green, black, white deck, because black is the splash. The Liliana we have to wait till much later to play in the other build. But that's honestly probably just okay. Yeah, I'm actually going to go for the 3-color build here. I think that the creature base here is weak enough and inconsistent enough. Like, this is even less than the other deck. This is 10 instead of 13, and we're running worse creatures like a Dawngryff, Devilthorn Fox stuff. Some Geese's Biddings to try to up that creature count. Lingering Souls helps too. Actually, when you count the tokens, creature base isn't that bad. Okay, well, apparently these say token on them. Yeah, they're ultimates. That's annoying. Discount the Sorin and the Liliana. Disregard those. I guess Descend Upon the Sinful can be a 4/4 angel late in the game potentially. 13, 14 maybe. Over here, we still had the Lingering Souls in the other build. We also had the Spider spawning in the other build and the Descend. So we still do have more creatures in the other build. As well as a lot easier time with Delirium. because we have Vessel of Nascency to consistently put an enchantment in the grave instead of Deadweight. We have Terrarian and Wildfield Scarecrow for 2 artifacts to get into the graveyard. I guess it's a pretty comparable time getting Delirium, because we also, in the other build, we only had 1 instance. In this build, we have 2. Some stuff like that. I guess the other build also has Self-Mill with Vessel of Nascency. Could be significantly good, and the Wildfield Scarecrow is super, super good for Delirium. Still got the Angelic Purge in both builds. Yeah, I'm going to go for the 3-color deck here. Lot of bouncing back and forth, but I just don't feel that I don't feel like the more consistent version of this deck is worth the kind of downgrade in power level, because our just creature curve looks really bad. In the other build, it also looks kind of bad, but we get a Sage of Ancient Lore, we get a Spider Spawning, we just get more power late in the game, and it's okay that we're dirtling early game a little bit between 3 colors, because the most powerful things going on in this sealed pool aren't just early aggro stuff in general. Like, we have okay early aggro if I wanted to be a super aggro version of this white-black deck, mainly just because of Lingering Souls on 3 and 4. But anytime we don't hit Lingering Souls, like, we're just going to play a Topplegeist into a Dragoon, into a Cathar, which is, like, fine, but not great aggro, and we're still going to be running all those cards in the 3-color deck. Or most of those cards. So, I'm going to go for the 3-color build. I don't think we're trying to get a consistent 2-color curve here. Let's just get all of the powerful cards in the sealed pool into one deck together. Alright, here we have a look at the completed deck for today. This is a green-white sealed deck with a splash of black for some very, very powerful planeswalkers and removal spells. Now, one of the things that's a little awkward about the mana base here, we only have the 1 dual land, the Fortified Village for green-white, and I am only playing 3 swamps in a deck that wants to hit double black for Liliana and a flashback ability off Sever the Bloodline, but our mana fixers can really help us get there. We have a Deathcap Cultivator making us basically have 4 natural black sources in the deck, and then Wildfield Scarecrow and Terrarian are 2 cards that can both give us access to double black off of just that card. Scarecrow can find 2 swamps and put them in hand, and Terrarian can get 2 black mana when we sacrifice it and draw a card off of it. So I think that triple swamp is the right place to be, because sure, we do need double black on these cards, but we've got a really low quantity of black cards. We have like 4 cards that want the black mana, and one of which we only need it for the flashback. Plus, all of those black spells are powerful enough that we can wait to draw the black sources till later in the game, whereas green and white are the primary colors we have to have nice and early. So other than that, we've got a nice consistent curve of creatures. Wanted to play a decent creature count in here. I believe we have about 13 in the deck. That way we can fill the grave with a ton of creatures as the game goes on, so a late game Spider Spawning can try to close things out. Spider Spawning being another one of the most powerful cards in this sealed pool. Lingering Souls as well being quite powerful, being 4/1 flyers off 1 card. Just kind of playing all of the strongest cards in our sealed pool within these 3 colors, and trying to win the game off some bombs, some explosive plays. Lingering Souls and Spawning can be pretty bomby, just playing a bunch of tokens. Obviously the Planeswalkers are bombs. And Descend Upon the Sinful, if we hit Delirium, is going to exile all creatures and then leave us with a 4/4 flyer that can also just completely win a game. So that's the game plan here. We just want to grind it out, make sure we get some blocks, some trades, maybe a little bit of value off some clue tokens from a Byway Courier or a Briarbridge Patrol. In the early game, a little bit of Self-Mill as well with Vessel of Nascency, or put an artifact on our grave with Scarecrow or Terrarian to help fill up that Delirium. And then once we hit the late game, as long as we've survived whatever early onslaught our opponents have, that is where we just start playing bombs. We drop Lilianas, Sorens, Spider Spawnings, anything like that. So that's the deck plan. Without further ado, let's hope it all works out for us as we cross our fingers and head into round 1 of the Shadows over Innistrad Remastered Arena Open. Alright, here we are in the gameplay. This is going to be post-editing commentary for today. This is not the new normal or anything, just considered a mild April Fool's special where the joke is on me for having to record commentary twice today. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into game 1. Keep a bit of a greedy hand here. The idea is that the Terrarian can fix our mana into casting Liliana the Last Hope on turn 3, as long as we draw 1 land in the first 2 turns. We do miss a land drop on our first draw step, but we do have a Blessed Alliance that we can use defensively against their first creature at the very least. Our opponent starts with a True Faith Censor, just going to give things +1/+0 Vigilance. We go ahead and miss our second draw, no land that turn, and at this point I just crack the Terrarian immediately. If we hit a land off the top, then we get to play Liliana on turn 3 on curve, and if we don't hit a land on top and I didn't end up sacking the Terrarian, it's going to end up being 2 turns at least before we hit a land, which means that we're going to be so far behind anyway that we should just crack the Terrarian to dig for extra lands to cast our other spells. So that's why I went for the Terrarian sacrifice there. It clearly didn't work out. We missed 2 more land drops on our next 2 draws. We go ahead and play an Ovalwald Captive for a mana dork. It gets exiled by our opponent with Anguished Unmaking. They've also cast a Faithless Looting to get some flyers on board. Here I go ahead and pass the turn discarding Liliana. The reason for that is that I can up my Delirium and Liliana is going to be completely uncastable anyway. But the one thing that I wasn't thinking of that I should have done here was also just go ahead and make them sack a 1/1 flyer with our Blessed Alliance that makes them sack an attacking creature of their choice. It's never going to get any better because it's not like we have any other way to kill all of the flyers here. I think I was getting like extra greedy and thinking, well, I don't need to Blessed Alliance a 1/1 flyer because I can descend upon the Sinful and exile everything, but we'd have to hit a lot of lands to get there. So at this point, pretty much my only line is Byway Courier, because if I Angelic Purge, the only thing I could sack there was a land, and obviously sacking a land when I have 3 lands on board, not going to be a viable play. So instead we play the Byway Courier, we chump block the Lone Rider with it. This way we have a clue token I could sacrifice to Angelic Purge if I need to Angelic Purge something here. But then I miss another land draw off the top, and at this point I figure my only out is going to be making it to 6 mana to cast Descend Upon the Sinful, so I should probably do everything in my power to keep the clue token to potentially crap towards getting another land, so I'll play the Dauntless Cathar instead and trade into the 4/2, rather than playing the Angelic Purge, losing my clue and trading into the 5/5. So that is the line we go for there. Our opponent is going to cast a Thraben Inspector, get another clue token, and recast that Lingering Souls, those 4 1/1 flyers off of the 1 card, just pretty devastating here. And then we end up drawing a black card, not a land, so we're just going to scoop it up there. That was a game that we would probably be losing even if the only card our opponent cast the entire game was Faithless Looting. We went for a bit of a greedy keep there and just got maximum punishment for it. So definitely the biggest gameplay decision there in hindsight was just to mulligan, and the other gameplay decision was to Blessed Alliance the 1/1 flyer. So here in game 2, we keep a very solid hand where we have Guardian of Pilgrims into Apothecary Geist no matter what. We've got our mana already set up there. So we slam down our 2 mana 2/2 Spirit, see what our opponent's up to with their red-black deck. They are on the play here and they go for a Collective Brutality, discarding a card to give our 2/2 -2/2 and make us discard our Sever the Bloodline. Follow it up with another Guardian of Pilgrims off the top. Pretty good draw there, giving us something to actually play on turn 3. Our opponent runs out a Haunted Dead, which is going to give them a 2/2 and a 1/1 flyer, and they can recast it from the grave by discarding some cards. So since we hit another copy of Guardian of Pilgrims, we get to slam down an Apothecary Geist and actually gain some life here, which is nice. And then they just play a land and pass the turn. And in this position, we're just going to start grinding things out with Apothecary Geist. We don't really have enough creatures in our grave for spider spawning to be that valuable. I think we have 1 creature in our grave right now. So we just slam down our Dauntless Cathar for another creature. If we get a few more trades going, getting at least 3 spiders off of the spider spawning is kind of the cutoff, where I think it's all right to cast it. I don't think I would ever cast it for just 2 spiders, unless I'm in a really, really bad position. So our opponent does attack in with Haunted Dead and the 1/1 flyer. I opt to not block at all, because the Haunted Geist can just come back, or the Haunted Dead can just come back from the grave. Then they cast a Burn Within to kill our flyer. We top deck the Sage of Ancient Lore, which was a beautiful draw. Play a pretty large creature and draw a card, get in with our creatures on the ground. They're down to 13, we are up to 20. They go ahead and cast an Alchemist's Greeting to kill the Sage of Ancient Lore. and chip in with their flyer. At this point, they've killed a couple more creatures of mine with removal spells. So I'm pretty okay with going for the attack here, trading into the Haunted Dead, filling my graveyard with one more creature, and then casting a post-combat spider spawning. And that is at that exact cutoff I was talking about, where now we've got 3 spiders off of it at least. And of course, we'll always have the ability to get another spider out of it later. And nicely for us, our opponent did trade the Haunted Dead into the Dauntless Cathar, so we can go ahead and get a 1/1 flyer out of that from the grave later. So our opponent's down to just a 1/1 flyer on board, plus a Nebelgast Herald off of a splash here, so they tap down our 2/2, but we can send all the spiders in, because at worst, they just trade into the 2/1 flyer, which is a pretty good deal. And our opponent does go down to 9. We go ahead and make the Spirit from Dauntless Cathar, slam down the Briar Bridge Patrol. Opponent goes for the recast of Haunted Dead, put it into play tapped, and get another 1/1 flyer. We are still in a position to just slam in with everybody. We're at 19 life here. We're just going to keep that pressure on. And Ovenwald Captive was our draw, which is actually pretty good here, because we can play it as a 1/2 defender that adds mana. That doesn't really matter right now. But next turn, we know we have 7 lands on board, so we can flip it and attack with it as a 4/6. And our opponent top decks, doesn't find what they need, scoops them up, and that is going to make us 1-1 heading into Game 3. Game 3 is another pretty simple keep. We have all 3 of our colors. That is the main thing making me keep this hand. Green, black, and white. We also get to start with turn 2 Ovenwald Captive, which allows us to play a turn 3 Sever the Bloodline if I really need to exile something early. Our opponent's on red-green starts with Obsessive Skinner on turn 2. And we're just setting up our mana here. Considering for a second if I should Sever the Bloodline to Skinner right now, but that feels a little aggressive to me to just throw our removal out this early. Opponent follows up the Skinner with a 3-mana 3/2 haste. That turns into a 4/3 at night, and we get a beautiful top deck here. We draw a Lingering Souls, which gives us an excellent way to spend all 5 of our mana here. Just go ahead and get 4 1/1s with flying. The thing that's pretty nice about this on the defensive here is that we can now just trade 2 1/1s into their 3/2 and their 2/2 if they attack with everybody. Instead, they play in Intrepid Provisioner to buff the Obsessive Skinner. Could quadruple block there, but I don't really feel like it. I don't really want to chump block either. I would rather try to get these tokens to trade into as many creatures as possible. Top deck a Terrarian, so I slam that down. I was trying to sack it immediately to see if we draw into anything, but I completely forgot that Terrarian enters the battlefield tapped. So that was a pretty nice one. I do go ahead and Sever the Bloodline here. Exile the 3/3 trample, and then I have enough blockers on the board to attempt to trade into both their attackers. Again, down at 11 life here with our opponent having a bunch more cards in hand. We're just trying to be as defensive as possible, survive as long as we can to try to draw into maybe our board wipe that we have in the deck. So our opponent does have a combat trick to win one of these fights, but we do still clear one of the creatures off the board. We've got that Sever the Bloodline in our graveyard that we could cast again next turn because we will have 7 mana up. However, we do top deck a Dauntless Cathar, which is a big enough creature to trade into that Gaia Reach Bandit, whether that card is on the front or the back side. So I actually just play the Dauntless Cathar here and try to set up a trade for the Bandit. I could alternatively have just passed the turn, blocked with Captive, and attempted to transform it at instant speed, make it a 4/6, but that felt a little greedy to me because there's a lot that could go wrong with that against combat tricks and little burn spells. So we just go for the Cathar trade instead, and Cathar does get them to not attack, and here is the one out we were looking for. We do draw into the Descend Upon the Sinful, which allows us to exile the entire board of creatures, and we draw an even better top deck after cracking Terrarian for double black. We top deck the Liliana of the Last Hope, which gives us a way to mill ourselves 2 cards with that -2 to help hit Delirium for Descend Upon the Sinful. And now if our opponent doesn't manage to kill Liliana, if they attack us with everybody, or they don't attack Liliana with all 3, then we just get to chump block as much as we can to make sure we're still alive, and then next turn exile all of their creatures and make a 4/4 flyer, and then still have a Liliana on the board to try to take the game over as a Planeswalker. So our opponent does send in the squad. They save one of their creatures from this combat with a combat trick, but that is okay with us because Descend Upon the Sinful is our game plan. We're going to exile the whole board, make a 4/4 flyer, and pass the turn. Oh, we'll plus Liliana as well.
Losing? Sorry, I'm not familiar.
And then our opponent's in top deck mode over here. They hit a spider spawning with one creature in grave because we exiled all of their other creatures. So the 5 mana 1/2 reach, one of the saddest spider spawnings that I've ever seen. Very depressing. Going through the motions here now, just minusing the spider with Liliana, spreading out the board state to make sure that we have the blockers to keep Liliana on board as well as keep ourselves alive. We are down to 7. Luckily, by making a Spirit from the Cathar and then playing Apothecary Geist, we do get to gain 3 life. Go up to 10. A little more breathing room there. Top deck a Briar Bridge Patrol. And we're going to keep going through the motions here. Now that Liliana's back up to 3 loyalty, we're just going to use Liliana to draw a creature out of our graveyard. We did mill into a Sage of Ancient Lore, so we get to play that instead of one of the more dirtly creatures that we had in grave earlier. Go ahead and attack with the flyers that are big enough to attack into the spider token. Hold everything else up for blocks. We do play a land so that we're holding up Blessed Alliance just in case. Opponent just hits a land off the top. They just have an Obsessive Skinner as a 2/2 and a 1/2 reach spider, and that is all they've got here down at 10 life. So go ahead and plus the Liliana, temporarily nullify the spider. That's going to let us attack with everybody, and they can't kill any of our creatures, so they just chump block the 4/4 flyer. Take 7 damage. They are down to 3. Let's go for the pass turn here, playing it really safe with a maximum mana Blessed Alliance up, and this also keeps the werewolf as large as possible. Our opponent tries to play a 5 mana 5/4 and then scoops them up because that is not going to be enough to survive our crackback. We are now in game number 4, 2-1, with a pretty great opening hand. We have Topplegeist into Lingering Souls on turn 3 to just put a ton of flyers on the board. So one of our most aggressive hands that we've had so far. Turn 2, draw into a Fortified Village, go ahead and reveal a forest. To get that out untapped, we can pretend we have Blessed Alliance in hand now. Opponent goes for the turn 2 Lone Rider. Go ahead and play the forest here. And we still don't have a black source, so I actually, because I don't have a black source and they have a Lone Rider on the board, I went ahead and played Wildfield Scarecrow. This is because the Wildfield Scarecrow can block the 1/1 First Strike lifelink as a 1/4 body very, very well. And of course, it can set up the black source to be able to flash back Lingering Souls or play any black cards that we draw into. So we go a little slower, a little more defensive here, kind of shut off the Lone Rider by playing the Scarecrow. So here I go for the Guardian of Pilgrims so that I can have the mana up to sacrifice the Scarecrow and pull some lands out of my deck. And we're just waiting for a more late game Lingering Souls where we'll just cast both halves in one turn. Opponent drops a Fiend Binder now. They can tap one of my blockers every time they attack. We go ahead and crack that Wildfield Scarecrow. Grab Double Swamp in case we top deck one of our double black cards. And then we top deck the 3rd Swamp. So we've got plenty of swamps here. Slam down that Sage of Ancient Lore, draw another card, and have a 5/5 on the board. And we drew into Descend Upon the Sinful for the board wipe, which is pretty spectacular. Alright, opponent is going to send in with Fiendbinder and Lone Rider. Go ahead and take the trade with the Fiendbinder, take the Lone Rider damage. Just a lot easier for combat tricks to go really poorly for us against the first striker. And then our opponent with the Reanimator strategy, Unburial Rites to reanimate a Bruna that they milled earlier with a Grapple with the Past. So here I go for the attack with the big werewolf to threaten some kind of combat trick, see if we can get some free damage in, because it's not really going to help us block too much anyway. So we'll get some extra damage in off of it. And then I go ahead and cast Lingering Souls, and I didn't flash it back because the whole point of my Lingering Souls here is to add to Delirium and give me some time, give me some chump blockers to try to get them to dump out more of their hand before I wipe the board. So we just cast one half of the Lingering Souls here so that we can have a sorcery engrave for Delirium, and we can have the chump blockers to take no damage this turn. Our opponent does go ahead and Angelic Purge to exile our Gigantic Werewolf, and they play one more creature, so their hand is down to one card. They do have an Unburial Rites in the graveyard, but their best creature in the grave is just the Fiendbinder, the 3/2, that taps something each turn. So this is where I go ahead and bite the bullet. I just hope that the last card in their hand isn't that great, because if we can board wipe and then the only thing that they can do afterwards is reanimate a 3/2, that's a pretty good position to be in, so that is what we try to do here. And that's what our opponent does. They just reanimate the 3/2. Top deck another land. We do have an Ulvenwald Captive and a Lingering Souls though, which means that we've got enough cards to reestablish a board state after the board wipe. And that's what we're working on doing here. We will cast both of those cards. And I really like the April Fool's board. As you can see there, I'm squishing all the little gummies and eating the Funyun Soul Rings. Opponent hits us for 3 with Fiendbinder and slams down a Sorin Grim Nemesis, which is a pretty bad time for us. We know the card well. We've got it in our own deck. They're just going to -X to kill a creature pretty much every turn. Apothecary Geist is a beautiful top deck for us. It allows us to hit Sorin for 2, putting Sorin to 2 loyalty, and then play a nice 3 toughness, 2 power flyer. And now we have 4 power in the sky, so it's pretty much impossible for Sorin by himself to protect himself from dying next turn. So they have to try to draw into some removal, so they use the plus ability, and all they hit there was a land. They then cast a Sage of Ancient Lore to draw another card. Send in the Fiendbinder. But they do not hit the removal cheap enough to kill one of our flyers, so we get to go ahead and just snipe the Sorin out of the sky here. Another land for us. We've got a ton of those here, which is starting to become a pretty big problem because we're basically out of gas now. We kind of have to top deck into our own Sorin or something very big like that. And then since we didn't get to play any spells there, their werewolf even flips, becomes bigger, vigilant, and trample, and all of a sudden they're attacking us for 1,000,000 damage. Got one final draw step. We are dead on board if we don't hit something good, and we just find another land here. So now, even if I don't attack with anybody, they can tap down the Apothecary Geist with Fiendbinder, and we have 2 toughness on the board against 8 trampling power, which means if I block as much damage as I can, I block the Fiendbinder, and 1 power of trample damage, which means I take exact lethal. I take 7 here if I block the best way I can. So instead, send a message, go ahead and trade off with the Fiendbinder, but that is going to be 2 and 2, I believe. Here we are now for game 5. Snapkeep here. It again has all 3 of our colors. That is just a huge reason to just snapkeep a hand with this deck. But we've also got that Vessel of Nascency to dig through our library, find a powerful draw. We did top deck a Deathcap Cultivator instead, so we're just going to run that out and get some more mana going pretty quickly. Our opponent also has a mana rock, the Cryptolith Fragment. So I get on the aggressive here. Since they're just playing a mana rock and not putting any creatures on board yet, we're going to do some damage while we can in the early game. Hit them for 2 with Cultivator, play some spirits off the Lingering Souls, So I can start hitting them in the sky, and then again, turn 4, they also play no creatures. And go ahead and hit with the spirits here, holding up the 5 mana to be able to play like a Sage of Ancient Lore. Could also play Courier and sack the Vessel of Nascency. They did have a Swift Spinner to flash in and kill one of our spirits, which is a bit of a bummer. But we go ahead and use our 5 mana, slam down the Sage of Ancient Lore, draw a card, and hit a Sever the Bloodline. So we have a board wipe in our hand if we're going to end up needing that, and we have a nice targeted removal spell with Sever the Bloodline. Just a really good hand here. Go ahead and hit another land off the top. Go ahead and crack the Vessel of Nascency here, so I can see what's coming up. Pick up a Liliana the Lost Hope, of course, and we have the mana here to sack that Vessel and Sever the Bloodline, killing the 4/5 to be able to get an attack in with the Sage if we want to do that. Do have a lot of options here though. We could play the Liliana instead, start getting some value by recurring things from grave, and they're not going to have any good attacks into Liliana. And that's what we opted to do here. Go ahead and -2, mill 2, start picking up creatures. Topplegeist is a phenomenal one to pick up because it's going to let us keep tapping down one of their creatures during their upkeep each turn, since we do have Delirium. That's going to make it really, really hard for them to attack into Liliana and start taking any chunks out of our Planeswalkers. Plus, it helps us attack in, and this ends up just playing so much better than just severing the wolves, because now we've basically shut off the wolves as long as Topplegeist is on turn, and we have a Liliana sitting on board, accruing extra value. So the Liliana line plays out super sweet here. So Swift Spinner, heading at the Liliana, we're just going to chump block to keep her around. Then an Ulvenwald Captive from our opponent. They do have 6 mana up, so they could flip it next turn, because 6 mana and a mana rock. But they go ahead and play Voldaren Pariah, pretty big bomb vampire. Lets them sack 3 cards to flip it and make us sack 3 cards. But we've of course got the removal in hand for that one creature, so we just clear that out and we're just way ahead in card advantage. We have a board wipe and a 3/2 that makes a clue in our hand. We have 2 1/1 flyers in grave. We have an extra removal spell in grave. The game is just going very, very far in our favor here. So keep upticking that Liliana till she gets to 3 loyalty, and then we start minusing. Transform the Ulvenwald Captive, start hitting with a 4/6. That'll kill them in 3 attacks. They are down to 8. They play an Ulrich of the Crawling Horde, a pretty big werewolf rare. When it flips to nighttime, that gets to fight with stuff, but we top deck the Swamp to just recast Sever the Bloodline. It's like, alright, well that makes things pretty simple here. We'll just exile that bomb creature. -2 the Liliana, pick up the Sage of Ancient Lore so we can recast it, draw another card in a bit. We've knocked our opponent down to 3 life, and they don't hit anything off the top. That puts us to 3-2 heading into round 6. Round 6 here, another snap keep because it has all 3 of our colors. With Deathcap Cultivator, it's basically a 3-land hand. This isn't quite a snap keep, it's pretty greedy. It's not as greedy as the hand that had the Liliana in it that we lost our first game with, but it is a hand that could pan out pretty poorly if we don't hit the lands that we need. Luckily for us, we do immediately hit some lands, so we get to play the Cultivator turn 2. Now we have 4 mana up on turn 3, so I go ahead and play Nearheath Chaplain. And we even drew into a Vessel of Nascency, which is wonderful because we can turn that Vessel into an additional land to help us hit our 5 and 6 mana plays like the Sage of Ancient Lore and Sorin. And our opponent got a really nice grapple with the past here that lets them mill 3, put a creature back in their hand. So they milled 3, put Gnarlwood Dryad back in their hand, but the other 2 cards they milled both have flashback abilities. The Lingering Souls giving them 2 1/1 Flying Spirits, and the Ghoul Caller's Accomplice giving them a 2/2 zombie. So we missed a land drop, so we go ahead and crack the Vessel of Nascency looking for a land. We don't find a land at the top 4, but we do find a Wildfield Scarecrow, which can eventually give us 2 more lands. So we take the Wildfield Scarecrow there. Not super happy about it. We really wanted to just play land for turn. But Scarecrow, while it is quite a bit worse because we have to dump 5 mana into it to get that land drop, does still fill the role for us. Opponent slams down Travel Preparations and flashes it back, really showing off the power of that card, getting 2 +1/+1 counters on both of their spirits. And now each spirit that they have is a really, really big problem. So because they're both 3/3 flyers at this point, I go ahead and get the life gain that I can out of the Chaplain because they're never going to attack us on the ground with those. So that's going to give me a little more breathing room and the ability to make some spirits from the grave if I need some chump blockers. Then we play the Wildfield Scarecrow, opting to go for a Blessed Alliance when they attack in, because this gets to kill a 3/3 flyer, which is a pretty good removal spell. A 3/3 flyer is a very big deal right now. So that halves the amount of damage they're doing to me each turn. And all they can do here is just make a 2/2 zombie with the Ghoul Caller Accomplice, play their land, and pass the turn. We top deck a Spider Spawning, which is beautiful. Could have cast it right now, but I decided to get a little greedy with it. Go ahead and get my lands off the Wildfield Scarecrow, and that means we'll have 4 creatures in grave for the Spider Spawning. And now that we've cracked the Wildfield Scarecrow for mana, we're in a position where we get to choose if we want to try to use Spider Spawning as a win condition or Sorin as a grim win condition, as a grim condition. Both would work fine here. They do get an equipment to put on the zombie to make it so I can't block profitably there, so that does put us down to 8. But then they don't play any more creatures, which means that we can just remove the flyer alone, and we still have 2 creatures that can block the zombie, so even if they have a removal spell, I can chump block to keep Sorin around. And if they don't have a removal spell, I can just trade my Death Toucher into the zombie, which not only protects Sorin and gets a creature off their board, but it also fuels our Spider Spawning and makes that even better. So that just worked really well for us that our opponent didn't have any creatures to follow up that turn. So we take the trade for the zombie, they drop down an Obsessive Skinner, and slam the equipment onto it so it's got 3 toughness. We did draw into a Liliana the Last Hope last turn, so we can actually slam down Liliana, -1 the Skinner's toughness, and that'll allow us to -2 Sorin so that we can leave both Planeswalkers on the battlefield and still deal with every creature they've been casting for a while. Which is pretty much what you want to do with your Planeswalkers in Limited. Just use them as repeatable removal spells to take over the game by being 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, and so on. So that's what we do there. We clear out the Obsessive Skinner, set up some blockers, getting those 1/1 spirits, making sure our Planeswalkers are well defended, and we're just going to sit here upticking Planeswalkers, grinding out the long game. Opponent drops Vessel of Nascency, digs pretty far with it, just finds an island. So they do have a blue source now for their splash color. But again, the board state is pretty overwhelmingly in our favor. We're just going to start upticking the Planeswalkers. We top deck to Topplegeist. Liliana is at 3 loyalty, so we actually get to minus Liliana and cast another creature here. Picking up the Ulvenwald Captive, because it can turn into a 4/6, so it can be a massive threat later in the game. Whenever we want to dump mana into it. And then I just slam down the Guardian of Pilgrims to provide some more just immediate damage, immediate life total pressure. Excuse me. When it hits the board, gives us an extra point of damage, plus it's immediately a 2/2 attacker before we have to dump any mana into it. Opponent goes for the Altered Ego to copy our Sage of Ancient Lore and draw a card. And then the way this game finishes is kind of funny because I plus the Sorin and I draw into the Sever the Bloodline. Go ahead and go for the Exile on their creature to clear the board and find lethal, and they immediately scoop, but technically, I didn't notice this, but Sever the Bloodline exiles all creatures with the same name, no matter who controls them. So it exiled my own Sage, so I didn't actually have lethal anymore because I chose to do that instead of just playing a Topplegeist and like tapping their creature. So that could have given them another turn to draw into some kind of Mega Bomb, but it would have had to have been a really good card for them to survive because they would have been at like 2 life anyway still. Anyways, for the next round we are against a blue-red deck here. I decided to play Guardian of Pilgrims instead of Deathcap Cultivator because the strongest things that blue-red decks can do in the format are cast a bunch of cheap instants and sorceries. So unless you have like a ton of good cheap burn spells and bounce spells in your blue and red, usually you're going to end up in other colors. So if we see that an opponent is playing blue and red, we expect a lot of cheap burn spells. So I'd like to drag one out on our non-mana dork before I play the mana dork, and that's exactly what happened here. They went ahead and shot the Guardian of Pilgrims, and that means that the Deathcap Cultivator is less likely to get shot down by removal. So opponent has Ingenious Scab on the board. Keeps getting bigger every time they cast an instant or sorcery. Just temporarily, just prowess. Cast a Take Inventory to draw a card, beat us down. And then play a Fogwalker, a 1/3 that can't be blocked except by 1-power creatures. We go ahead and slam down Briarbridge Patrol, our 3/3 that makes clues when it does combat damage. It's pretty cookie cutter magic here. Just the general setup turns. Don't go for any blocks here because I can't block Fogwalker, and if I block the Scab with anything, all they have to do is play any instant anywhere, and it'll beat either of my creatures with prowess, because it would turn into a 3/4 off prowess. So instead, since I didn't block, they dumped their mana into dealing 2 extra damage to me, so I'm down to 12. Just getting pretty spooky. I am in a scary enough position here that I decide to sever the bloodline, the Ingenious Scab. The thinking here is that card is just so hard to block profitably, because it's so easy to get in a position where we attempt to block it and then they just cast an instant speed burn spell on some other creature we control, and all of a sudden they're killing one of our creatures with their burn spell and just winning the combat without even losing a creature. So we just want to get rid of that Ingenious Scab. It's just way too hard to block it well. Unfortunately, they do follow it up with another Ingenious Scab the next turn, so now there's another one we gotta deal with. We do have an Angelic Purge that can deal with that. And again, I do just kind of want to keep dealing with the Ingenious Scabs because they're the only thing that matters a lot in combat. If they keep hitting us for 1 with Fogwalker, that's fine. We can outrace that pretty heavily with the 5 power on board. And here I go for a play that might be a little greedy. I think in hindsight I would do this differently. I decided to sacrifice a land here. The thinking is that if my Deathcap Cultivator dies, then my only black source is Terrarian. And also, Terrarian's the only way I'm going to cast a double black card, like recasting Sever the Bloodline. That being said, if I sacrificed Terrarian to Angelic Purge, then we would have drawn a card immediately, and we'd still have 1 black source, so as long as we didn't hit like Liliana herself, we'd still be in a decent position. So I think I probably should have sacked Terrarian there to the Purge. Opponent plays nothing the next turn. We top deck Lingering Souls, which is obviously insane. Just an incredible card here. Opponent goes for Borrowed Hostility to go ahead and trade that combat trick into our 3/3, which is a-okay with me. But then they have Declaration in Stone to exile all creatures with the same name as a creature and just clear out all of my Lingering Soul Spirit tokens. Luckily, again, we're only taking 1 damage a turn. They do have the Incendiary Flow to kill our mana dork, so it does feel nice to have Terrarian for black mana. But now we get to start playing Apothecary Geists, trying to outrace them in the sky. And with 2 copies of Apothecary Geist, that's not super hard to do, because one of them did gain us 3 life when it hits the board. So opponent down to 10, we are down to 12. And they did not attack with Fogwalker there. I don't know why they didn't attack with Fogwalker there, or I don't remember why. Maybe we'll see here. Because I can't block the Fogwalker, and they can't block the Geists, so a little weird not to see Fogwalker get in there. This is a little bit of an interesting turn, so I decided to look at my graveyard there to see what I could pick up with Liliana, to see if it would be worth it to just play Liliana and pick up a creature. I decided not to, because if I play Liliana off this Terrarian, then the mana that I need for Sever the Bloodline is gone. By keeping Terrarian on board, if I top deck a 7th land, just any basic land, then we know we can Sever the Bloodline any flying blockers they might end up playing, guaranteeing that we keep chipping in for 4 a turn and just keeping a 2-turn clock. So I actually think it's better to be able to have the mana to play Sever the Bloodline than it is to just play a Liliana on that board state. So that's why I didn't crack Terrarian, play Liliana there. We did draw Vessel of Nascency, which is an incredible card. Let us dig 4 cards deep, find something good, and Topplegeist is something exceptional. Gonna let us tap down one of their creatures during their upkeep each turn, which slows them down a lot, makes it so we are very far in the lead when it comes to the race. But they do have a Silent Departure, which bounces one of our creatures and flashes back to do it again, so they can bounce both of our Apothecary Geists now. So we're not hitting them for lethal this turn, but they are down to 2 and we're at 10, and when we play these guys we get to gain life. However, from looking at my graveyard earlier, knowing that they don't have anything else in hand here, I did remember, hey, we've got that card that gives something +1/+1 when it hits the board and grave, so I can play Liliana, I can return our 2/2 that gives something +1/+1 to hand, and I can just play that, buff the Topplegeist, hit them for lethal. Right now, don't even give them another turn to top deck anything, so very fancy way to end the game. I don't think it was necessary. We probably could have just jammed out some Apothecary Geists. Might have even been safer in case they had a 1 red mana burn spell, but it was pretty fancy. It was pretty cool. It was fun to do there. For the next game, we are on another Slam Dunk Auto Keep. We have all 3 colors, and we have a Topplegeist turn 1 into a Guardian of Pilgrims turn 2. So we're curving out a little bit, and we have all of our colors. So really good hand here. Chip in for some damage with Topplegeist and Guardian. Opponent is stuck on mono green, 2 lands so far. They play a Deathcap Cultivator. I just slammed the board in. I'm very okay trading a 2/2 into a 2/1 Mana Dork. And then they do take the trade. Play a land and pass. And here's where things are a little weird to me. Because I would not expect our opponent to immediately trade the Mana Dork off and then crack Terrarian for double white to play an off-color card from their hand and then play 0 lands. I was very confused at that time. I was like, wait a second. I guess they don't have any black cards in hand, but still, just being a green, another green source, being their 3rd mana, feels like it was pretty valuable to them. So it's kind of weird to me that they traded off the Mana Dork so early. Maybe they have a lot of like graveyard recursion in their deck or something. Anyways, we didn't have anything else to do here, so we go ahead and Blessed Alliance for 4, make them kill the Lone Rider, and let us gain 4 life. And we know what we're doing turn 5, just drop a Sage of Ancient Lore, draw a card. Here's a Grapple with the Past for our opponent, definitely looking for a land, and they don't find one. They mill 3 non-land cards and just pick up the Deathcap Cultivator to be able to play it as a Mana Dork again, so really rough mana position for our opponent. Luckily enough, though, for them, our hand and our deck in general aren't that aggressive, so we're not really pressuring them much. But them having a particularly slow start does give us a lot of time to dig for our bombs, to try to win the game with those. So they've got a Topplegeist and a Deathcap Cultivator with full Delirium. We've got a Spider spawning for only 1, so instead of playing the Spider spawning here, I'm just going to sack the Vessel of Nascency, see if I can mill some more creatures, maybe find Delirium, maybe find some good stuff here. Go ahead and pick up the Briarbridge Patrol. I think that was a mistake because I only have 1 black source on the board and we were about to mill a Sever the Bloodline. So if I picked up the Swamp, I could know that I could flash back the Sever no matter what. But my idea there was with a Spider spawning in hand, I can now go ahead and just trade a bunch of creatures off, especially when they're creatures like Byway Courier and Briarbridge Patrol that both give us a clue when they trade off. So that I'm getting good value, just getting 1-for-1 trades and then sacking clues to draw cards, and then just try to play a nice long grindy game, trading off every creature I draw into until we Spider spawning later for 5 or 6. So that was the idea there, but if I just let Briarbridge Patrol go in the graveyard, it would have been adding another Spider anyway. We just wouldn't be getting a clue token out of it. We did top deck Descend Upon the Sinful, so now we have our board wipe and we have Delirium, so it's a board wipe and make a 4/4 flyer. Go ahead and attack with the Sage of Ancient Lore, again with the Spider spawning in hand. Very cool, just taking a ton of 1-for-1 trades. Especially when I'm about to play multiple creatures that trade off and investigate at the same time. So now we're just working on filling our graveyard for the Spider spawning. Saving Descend Upon the Sinful as a backup plan. There's an Ulvenwald Mysteries from our opponent. They get a clue token when their non-tokens die. And when they sack a clue, they get a token. So pretty slow card for them while they're stuck on 3 mana. So I'm not particularly worried about the clue value that they're getting, so I'm just going to keep going for all the 1-for-1 trades on board. Go ahead and crack the clue that we got. Draw another land. And then we go ahead and play the Byway Courier to trade off with something and get another clue. They do play a Fiend Binder, which is small enough to trade the Byway Courier into. Go ahead and play our land for turn, send in the Byway Courier. I was hoping to just trade it off here. And I didn't play Guardian of Pilgrims pre-combat because if it ended up trading off, I wanted to have the mana to play Spider Spawning and sacrifice the clue. So I think it was worth one missed point of damage on the off chance that we do get the trade in. We get to just draw another card instead. Does feel like it would have been better. But yeah, the grave is definitely full enough for Spider Spawning to be great here. Getting 4 spiders now, and then 5 or 6 spiders next turn after one of our creatures trades off. Should be a pretty quick way to close out the game against our opponent at 12 life. My apologies if you can hear my stomach. Go ahead and attack with everybody here. We know we're going to get at least 4 damage in, and we're going to trade one of our creatures off. I think opponent could have swapped those blocks around and killed one less of our creatures to make Spider Spawning a little less bad. But either way, they were pretty dead here, so they are going to scoop them up. We're going to move on to the next game. We are now slamming down a Vessel of Nascency turn 1, another auto keep hand with all 3 colors, a Vessel of Nascency to dig for something good. And I believe this is game 9 here. So we are 6-2. This is the deciding game if we're going to be 6-3 or 7-2. Opponent is on black-white. Turn 1 Thraben Inspector is very nice for them. Gives them a 1-2, gives them a clue token. Now a turn 2 Devil Thorn Fox is pretty threatening. Very quick, aggressive start from our opponent. We go ahead and grab a Topplegeist from the Vessel of Nascency because that card is so good at manipulating the board state, keeping our opponent's scariest attackers tapped down. So we're going to play Wildfield Scarecrow for now. That can block the Devil Thorn Fox unless they play a combat trick. Plus, whenever it dies, we'll have an enchantment, creature, land, and artifact in our graveyard, and we will have full Delirium for the Topplegeist. So play our 4th land, go ahead and get a Spirit from Dauntless Cathar, and drop an Ulvenwald Captive, just trying to make a wide board state with as many blockers as possible. We can crack the Wildfield Scarecrow later in the game. Opponent slams down a 5-mana 3/4 lifelink. So we're going to go for the Apothecary Geist, gain a few life, and start chipping away in the sky, putting a clock on our opponent. The great thing here is we have the 2 mana up to sack the Scarecrow to pick up some lands, so we get to chump block the Paladin and sacrifice it so that they don't deal any damage, they don't gain any life. This way we get to speed up our clock in the sky. And our plan here is we're going to play Topplegeist, and we're just going to keep their lifelinker tapped down every single turn. So we keep beating them down in the sky, and they have no way to be gaining any life here. Trying to outrace us. There's a Bygone Bishop from our opponent, which is a great flyer that can also generate some clues for card advantage. So since they played that, we go ahead and sever it, I believe? Yeah, sever the bloodline on the Bygone Bishop. Get the flyer out of the way so that we can keep the skies clear for us to outrace them there. But then we're still just on Topplegeist to keep the lifelinker tapped. Our opponent does crack a clue to draw a card. We're going to send in for 3 in the sky and pass the turn. Tap down the lifelinker with Topplegeist's ability. And we top deck a Lingering Souls, which is incredible here. We've gotten really lucky in a lot of the winning games today. We get to attack in with all of our flyers now and make 4 more 1/1 flyers, which is absolutely nuts. So our opponent is just making clues with the magnifying glass, sacking clues with it, trying to draw into anything that can get them out of this position. We just make a bunch of flyers, pass the turn, tap down the lifelinker. Really good stuff from Topplegeist. They do find the deadweight to kill the Topplegeist, but they're down to 12 life, and they're facing 7 flying power on our board, so it is looking too late for them. Here I have to choose between Angelic Purging and Severing the Paladin. I choose to Sever it because there's a few things in our deck that might want us to have 1,000,000 mana on board, so sacking a land to the Purge could end up biting us. Like if we draw into a Sorin and use Sorin's Plus to draw another card, and that card's also kind of expensive, we could need a boatload of mana to do that. And then there's also the fact that if they have any kind of graveyard interaction, there's very, very little in the format, but if they did, and we went for Angelic Purge, that would give them more time to draw into something that could exile our flashback card from our grave. So opponent is just digging here, playing clue tokens, sacking them. Now they play a Ruthless Disposal to kill 2 of our creatures. That does keep them from dying this turn. We can hit them for 4 in the sky. The 2 lines I could do would be flip the Captive and attack to force them to chump block with an Inspector, or just play the Sage to get my board state wider. And I do decide to expand the board state there. And then they just don't draw into an out, so they scoop them up, and that is the final victory. That is 7-2. We got a couple losses nice and early in this Arena Open run. It was looking pretty bleak at the start, but we just hit an excellent win streak in the end, drawing all of our bomb rares in our 3-color deck, hitting all the kinds of mana that we need, and we're going to be leaving the event with 5,000 gems and a qualification for day 2, which will be live recorded, those videos. So look forward to that. No post commentary there. I've got everything fixed on OBS and set up. But here's a last look at the deck. If you're interested in that, everything was incredible. Obviously, it's just a super bomb heavy deck with some decent mana fixing to make sure we can get there. Big overperformer to Topplegeist. Everything else was just kind of as we expected. Just great value plays and all of that. But that's going to do it. That is going to end today's video. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, you can always like, comment, and subscribe to tell the YouTube algorithm to send you some more of these videos in your recommended feed. If you'd like to catch me live, you can check out the Twitch channel in the link in the description below. If you'd like to support the channel directly, you can check out the Patreon link in the description below. Other than that, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow for the Arena Open Day 2.